Okay, hi everyone. So today we keep going on the SIS problem. So let me just recall briefly SIS with three parameters, Q, M, and beta. So we are given a matrix A. Has M rows, N columns. Mod Q, which is uniformly chosen. And our goal to find X in Z to the M such that xt A is 0 mod Q and X is not too large. Okay, so the hardness, at least in terms of best known algorithm, grows with N, Q, and decreases with beta. So the larger beta, the easier the problem. Okay, so the typical parameters, just to fix the IDs. M is about N log Q. Q is poly of N. And beta is a small poly of N. Okay, so I don't know, in practice you can think of N to be several hundreds, M to be a couple of thousands, and Q, I don't know, like 10 to 15 bits. So that's to give an order of magnitude. Okay, so yesterday we saw that this was in fact some kind of short vector problem for a random family of lattices. So now I'm so yesterday, so this is an SVP variant for a random family of lattices. Okay, so in particular, if you can solve SVP in the worst case, then you can solve SIS. If you are able to find short vectors in lattices, you are able to solve SIS. That's exactly what we did yesterday to measure the resistance of SIS against the BKZ algorithm. We assume that we have an algorithm that finds short vectors, it solves SIS. Okay, so the reverse is actually true, and that's why SIS was introduced in the first place. Okay, so it's a theorem which is due to ITI, and that was improved over the years. And I'm giving a variant which is due to Gentry, Peikert, and Vaikutanathan. So this is 08. And this one is 96. Okay, so any probabilistic polynomial time algorithm A that solves SIS Q, M, beta with non-negligible probability. Okay, so the probability is both over the internal randomness of the algorithm A and the randomness of the choice of the matrix A. Okay, so if it manages to find short vectors in the kernels of such matrices with non-negligible probability, so if I have such an algorithm, I can use such an algorithm to solve SIVP in the worst case. Then there exists any can be used to build an algorithm B, a probabilistic polynomial time algorithm B, that solves SIVP gamma, so the shortest independent vectors problem with parameter gamma, in the worst case, for all n-dimensional lattices in dimension n. N in the worst case. Yes. What gamma? That's indeed. So that's a very good point. So Q, when gamma is at least some soft tau of beta square root n, okay, so it's a bit bigger than beta. And Q should not be too small either. Q is at least some soft tau of beta square root n. Okay, so several comments are in order with such a theorem. Okay, so this is unusual in terms of reductions, because usually if you have an average case problem and a worst case problem, if you can solve in the worst case, you can solve on the average case. Because the average instance is just one instance among many. Okay, so this is the other direction. So it's very unusual. So it says that if you can solve with non-negligible probability for a random instance, then you can always solve. Okay. So that's quite, it's the opposite of the trivial direction. Okay. One interpretation of this is to say that these SVP instances for this random family of lattices, they don't hide, I mean, they already capture the full hardness. So there are no weaker than the worst case instances. So they're already capturing the full hardness of SVP. Okay, so that's one way of interpreting this. But it's in a way, if you pick randomly in this family, it's already hard. Okay, so that's one remark. Another remark is that all this works only asymptotically. And doesn't say much about the runtime of B. Okay, so it's polynomial in the runtime of A and all the parameters. but that could be a very large polynomial. Okay. So in a more pedantic way, the reduction is not tight at all. Okay, so a consequence of this is that you shouldn't use this reduction to set cryptographic parameters. So for example, we could say solving SIVP with this approximation factor in dimension 500, it's supposed to be 2 to the 80 harder to solve with the best known algorithms. Okay, so that's somewhat convincing with the algorithms that we know experimentally. So let's assume this and set parameters for SIS using this reduction. I mean, this, if you do this, you will end up with very large parameters. So don't use it. Don't do that. And also, from a theoretical viewpoint, it makes very little sense to do it. Why? Because to use this theorem in a meaningful sense, you would need to know the worst case instance for SIVP. Okay, so it says, the theorem says, if the worst case instance of SIVP is difficult, then SIS is difficult. But what is this worst case instance of SIVP? Okay, so no one knows. I mean, in dimension 2000, I ask you to find the worst case instance, you have no clue. And what people do instead, so they say, but the worst case instance is just an average case instance, so I sample an average case instance and I use it as my worst case instance. Okay, so in the end, you are just doing loops with the theorem in a totally meaningless way. So because the only way to estimate, the only known way to estimate worst case hardness is to sample a random instance and hope that it's not too far from the worst case. So from a practical perspective, this theorem doesn't help much. From a theoretical perspective, it says that there is nothing fundamentally weak in SIS if we assume that lattice problems are hard. Okay, so it says that SIS captures the hardness asymptotically. There is no gaping hole when you define SIS. Okay, so that's one comment on the practicality of this theorem. Okay, another comment, which I already mentioned, I think, on Monday. So here, the best beta that you can take is beta equals square root 10. Why? Because in these lattices, in the lambda Q pair of A lattices, the minimum is of the order of square root 10 by Minkowski's theorem. And we also gave lower bounds yesterday. So if we put them in terms of the Euclidean norm, you will get a square root 10 factor. So setting beta below square root 10 in SIS makes no sense. So yes, you have a hard problem, but it's just hard because there is no solution. Okay, so it's trivially hard. Okay, so in this case, the reduction is meaningless. Because the reduction says if we assume that SIVP is hard, then SIS is hard. But SIS is already trivially hard, so it's not really interesting. So the reduction starts being interesting for beta equals square root 10. In which case we have gamma of the order of n up to log n factors. And if you remember, for gamma of the order of n, all these worst-case lattice problems are strongly believed not to be NP-hard anymore. So we are in a range of parameters for which NP-hardness is strongly believed to be gone. So it's a very interesting problem to get smaller gammas with such average case to worst case reductions. It seems kind of stuck at the moment. I mean, improving over this has been stalled for several years. So there has been an improvement on the condition on Q. So a smaller Q is possible if you use a result by Michenchu and Peikert. But in terms of gamma, it's stuck at the moment. Any question on this? Yes?
You're saying that a linear approximation factor is too big for NP-hardness?
Yeah. So what I said yesterday, no, not yesterday, on Monday, is that, for example, SVP with approximation factor square root 10, it belongs to NP and co-NP. So if you have a vector, a lattice, you can both give a witness that there is a short vector in the lattice. So this is usually easy. You just give a vector and you check that it's in the lattice and it's small. So having an NP witness is easy. But you can also prove that there is no short vector in the lattice, which is intrinsically more difficult because then you have to show that no short vectors belongs to the lattice. That's more difficult. But you can do it for such approximation factors. For square root 10 approximation factors, you can show that there is no very short vector in the lattice. So for these approximation factors, SVP is in NP cap co-NP. And in complexity theory, it's strongly believed that there is no NP-hard problem in NP cap co-NP. Otherwise, something weird happens with complexity classes. So you have a hierarchy of complexity classes that we believe are all distinct from one another. And then they all collapse to the same thing. It's not a proof. It's only a conjecture. Any other question? So I'm not going to prove this. Because, so the proof of SIS hardness is not too difficult now. It's been cleaned up quite a while. So if you're interested, you can go to the proof of Gentry, Peikert, and Vaikutanathan. But it requires discrete Gaussians over lattices. And I didn't want to do discrete Gaussians. So if you're interested in the proof, go and look at the GPV article. Okay, so now let's use SIS to do crypto. So I start with a very simple application. Okay, so I claim that SIS gives me a collision-resistant hash function family. Okay, so my hash function indexed by the matrix A. So A is in ZQ to the M times N is public. Okay, so my hash function goes from 0,1 to the M to ZQ to the N. Okay, and takes a vector X and maps it to XTA. Okay. So a very simple function, just a matrix vector multiplication. I can even take X to be binary so that it's just a subset sum of the rows of A. Okay, so this is called the I-Tice hash function. Okay, so if you set M, Q, and N properly, it is compressing, because here you have M bits, and here you have N log Q bits in the output. So if you set M to be, I don't know, more than 2 times N log Q, then you compress by a factor 2. Okay. So the fact that it's compressing is not too difficult. What's maybe more puzzling is that it's secure. So it's secure in the sense of resisting collisions. So okay, so now let's assume that we have an adversary A that for a uniformly chosen matrix A is able to find a collision. There exists an adversary A that with non-negligible probability over the choice of A finds x1 different from x2 such that h of x1 equal h of x2. Okay, so I'm assuming that I have an algorithm that finds collisions. Okay, so what I claim is that we can use this algorithm to solve SIS. Okay, so let's rewrite what the algorithm does. So we have x1 TA equal x2 TA with x1 and x2 in 0, 1 to the m, distinct. Okay, so by linearity, I can put both x1 and x2 on the same side. And I just find out that x1 minus x2 transpose times A is 0 mod Q. Okay. And x1 minus x2 is non-zero. Because they are distinct. And now x1 minus n2, x2 is a ternary vector. It's a vector with coordinates in -1, 0, 1. So its Euclidean norm is at most Carothem. Okay. So this gives me a solution to SIS Q, M, and beta equal square root M. Okay, so if I assume that SIS with such parameters is difficult, then it's hard to find such collisions. So actually, there was a candidate at the Chasserie Nice competition that was designed from this. So there was so it was called SwiftX or Swift. Based on ITICE hash function. So far, so good? Okay, so now let's move on to signatures. So what I want to describe is Lubachevsky's signature. But in fact, Lubachevsky's signature is an extension to SIS of Schnorr's signature. So I'm going to recall Schnorr's signature, unless you all tell me that you know it by heart. No. Okay, so Schnorr's signature. Okay, so let's assume I have a cyclic group. Cyclic group of order P. For which DLP is difficult. Is presumed difficult. Okay. So how does it work? So a signature algorithm is made of a signature protocol is made of 3 algorithms. So I have keygen with the secret key some x taken from ZP. And the verification key is G to the X. Okay. So to sign, I have a signing key and a message. So in the case of Schnorr signatures, the message is an arbitrary bit string. Okay, so how does that work? So I sample some k. So k has the same type as x. Okay, so it's going to serve as some kind of mask for x. Okay, and R is G to the k. Okay, so R is somewhat compatible with the verification key in terms of types. Okay, so I'm duplicating keygen so far. Okay, then I generate some challenge C, which is obtained by applying a hash function to vk R and the message. Okay, so H is a hash function, and we are going to model it as a random oracle. Okay, so what does it mean, model it as a random oracle? It means that if I query it twice on the same input, it gives me the same output. It's a function. But if I query it on a new input that has not been queried so far, the output is uniform. Okay. Okay. And now the signature is how did I call it? K plus C times X. So C is mod P. And C. Okay, and this bit I call S. Okay, so the signature is made of 2 elements, some integer mod P and another integer mod P, which is a challenge, which is the output of the hash function. Okay, so how do I check correctness? How do I verify? So I have a verification key, I have a signature, and I have a message. Okay. So I want to compute this R from S. Okay, so what you observe is that G to the S, so I want to get G to the K. So G to the S, that's G to the K times G to the C times X. But now I know G to the X because that's the verification key. Okay, so I compute R prime equal G to the S. Okay, I want to get the same as this one. So I have G to the K, and I want to remove G to the C times X. I know C, and I know G to the X. So I divide by verification key to the C. Okay, so it's meant to be the same as G to the K, if everything is correct. And now I check that hash of vk r prime m is equal to C. Okay, so if the check passes, I output 1. If the check doesn't pass, I output 0. Okay, so let's check correctness. So correctness. Okay, so let's assume SC is the output signed on SK and the message M. Okay. Then G to the S divided by VK to the C is equal to G to the X, no, how did I call it? K plus C times S divided by G to the X, X to the C. Okay, so are my notations correct? Yes. Okay, and the G to the X's, they disappear. So this is G to the K. And now if I hash Vk, this is G to the K and M, I recover the same hash as before. Okay. So now I want to comment a little bit on the design of this. So why was it designed this way? So in fact, it's starting from zero knowledge proof that you know the discrete log of X. Okay, so let's say we have a prover. Okay, so the prover becomes a signer eventually. The prover has X and G to the X. It sends, and there is a verifier that has G to the X. So the verifier becomes the person that verifies the signature. And the prover wants to convince V that it has X. Okay, so a trivial solution is for the prover to just send X. But if it does this, there is no secret left. So it wants to convince V that it has X, but without revealing X. Okay, so what does it do? So let's try to keep the same notations. It samples K from ZP, and it sends K to the verifier. G to the K, what does it send? G to the K to the verifier. Okay, and then the verifier sends a challenge. And now the goal of the prover is to reply with K plus X times C. Okay? Because the only way, okay, so now how does the verifier check? It checks that g to the k plus xc is indeed the g to the k that it has times the g to the x, which it has, to the c that it generated. Okay, so what we hope is that the only way for the prover to be able to reply to this request in a correct way is to know x, multiply it with c, and add k. Okay, so this is the intuition behind this zero-knowledge proof. And so this shows that the prover has to be honest. It has to know x and to pass verification. On the other hand, the verifier doesn't know much from here because k plus xc, where if k is uniform, even if it knows c, this transcript is still uniform, so it doesn't extract information from x. Okay, so that's the intuition of the protocol. Okay, and now what is this signature? So this protocol is interactive, so it cannot serve as a signature. So the signature scheme is just a non-interactive version of this zero-knowledge proof. Okay, where the C, instead of being chosen by the verifier, is just given by the hash function. Okay, and the hash function cannot be controlled by the prover because it's a hash function. Every new input gives a new output, gives a new random output. Any questions so far? So I'm not going to prove the security of Schnorr's signature, but I want to sketch the proof. So I want to give two important ingredients for the proof. Okay, so here is how a proof would look like. Okay, so we have an attacker. So we assume we have an attacker and we want to solve an interesting problem. Okay, so the attacker interacts with some challenger. And the challenger is given as input an instance of, okay, so here is the attack. So the modeling of the attack. And then I will say how we exploit it to break an interesting open problem. Okay, so the challenger generates VK and SK from keygen and sends VK to the adversary. Okay. Then the adversary can make different types of queries. It can make signed queries. Okay, so it chooses an MI and it says, give me a signature. Then the challenger should run SI sig I receives sign of SK MI and should return sig I to the adversary. So the adversary sees a certain number of signatures. The adversary is also allowed to make random oracle queries. Okay, so a random oracle query is of the type VKJ, RJ, MJ, and hash. And then it gets a CJ. Okay, so it can do these queries. It can repeat some. It can intertwine them, and so on. At some stage, it should win. The attackers should produce a forgery. And the forgery is a message M star and a signature sig star, such that verify of VK M star, sorry, sig star M star is 1. So it's a signature that passes verification. And it's not a trivial one. So it's not a trivial one in the sense that M star 6 star is not one of the message signature pairs that it already has thanks to the Oracle queries. Okay. Okay, so that models the attacker. Now, if we assume that we have an attacker, we want to be able to solve an interesting problem. And the interesting problem here is DLP. Okay, so now I have a DLP instance. So I have the challenger receives some G to the X. And the goal of the challenger is to use the adversary to output the X. Okay, so asked to solve a DLP instance. Okay. So in particular, it doesn't do keygen anymore, because it's somehow it needs to plug G to the X somewhere in the protocol so that if A manages to break, C can recover X. So it sets VK equal G to the X. Okay. One difficulty here now is that, okay, so it sends VK to A, it has the correct distribution, A is happy so far. The next difficulty is that the challenger needs to be able to reply to A's queries. Okay. So before, when there was a signature query, the challenger was just signing using the secret key. But now it has to reply to the queries and it doesn't have the secret key. Okay, so it needs a way to generate valid-looking signatures without using the secret key. Okay, so how does it do it? Okay, and whatever it replies to the adversary should make the adversary happy. So in particular, these replies to the signature queries should pass verification. Okay. So in the real setting, okay, so it samples K. And it has C, which is H of Vk, G to the K, and M. And it replies K plus Cx and C. So now here is how the attacker would simulate, the challenger would simulate. Okay, so it doesn't know K. So it's going to sample S. Okay, so this should be uniform. Because K is chosen uniformly, this S should be uniform. So the first thing that the simulation does is to sample S uniform. It will pretend that this is the left-hand side of the signature. But now there is a difficulty in that it should still pass verification. Okay, so we want, so what do we want? We want G to the S divided by Vk to the C. We want the hash of Vk and this, and the message to be C. So this is the verification algorithm. So how does the simulation ensure that it's indeed the case? So it creates a C. Okay, so it also creates C in ZP. So far so good. I have two things that are uniform and they are meant to be uniform. And to make sure that hash evaluated in whatever is equal to C, I reprogram hash. I program the hash function so that its output to this input is indeed C. So you program h of Vk G to the S divided by Vk to the C and M as C. Okay, so you cheat because it looks like a cheat because here the simulation controls the hash function. So you program the random oracle. And you can do that because the only access that the adversary has to the random oracle is via the challenger. Okay, so this is how the challenger replies to signature queries and hash queries. Okay, so now the adversary is happy at the first step because it gets a VK which is properly generated. When it makes signature and hash queries, it gets consistent outputs. So that means whenever verification should pass, it does pass. And the distributions of the transcripts look like valid distributions of transcripts in the sense that SC is uniform. Okay, so far, as long as A makes its queries, A is happy. Okay, so A eventually succeeds in making a forgery. So it generates an M star, 6 star that passes verification and which was not one of the previous pairs MI sig I. And to finish the proof of security, we should make some use of whatever A outputs. Okay, so given A's output, we should be able to solve the discrete logarithm problem. To forge. In order to solve, find X. Okay, so what does it mean to succeed? It means H of Vk, so 6 star, that's S star, C star. So where is it? G to the S star divided by Vk to the C star and M star is equal to C star. Okay. So here the first observation is that if the attacker never queried this input to the random oracle, there is no chance this happens. Because if it's a new input to the random oracle, the output will be uniform, and the probability that it hits C star is super small. Okay. So to have a chance for this to happen, Vk, okay, so let's call it R star M star must have been hash queried before. Okay. So at some stage, this triple is generated by the adversary. It's sent to the attacker, to the challenger for a hash query, and it gets back C star. Okay. So here is something which is somewhat unnatural in the proof of Schnorr's signature. We are going to pretend that, okay, so at this stage, when this hash query happens, we are going to fork. So we do a first execution where the challenger outputs some C star, which is fresh and uniform. And then we are going to do a second execution where on the same input, the challenger outputs another C star, which is also fresh and uniform. Okay, because at this stage in the execution of the adversary, it queries this, and the challenger outputs something uniform, and then the adversary succeeds with non-negligible probability. So if I do it twice with two different C stars, the adversary should also succeed with non-negligible probability using the same stars, the same C stars and the same R star until the end. So it should manage to succeed in both cases. Okay. So challenger runs A twice, but when A queries Vk, R star, and C star, it first outputs C star the first time, and C prime star the second time. Okay, so A succeeds with non-negligible probability in both cases. So we have H of Vk G to the S star over Vk to the C star M star equals C star. And, sorry, so this is an R star equal G to the S star divided by Vk to the C star. And H of Vk, so this is for the first run. And for the second run, we have the same R star, same M star, and a different C star. And now this R star has to be a different G to the S prime star divided by Vk to the C prime star. Okay, so in particular, this R star being the same, we have this relationship between S star, C star, and R star, and S prime star, C prime star, and R star, which gives that R star is equal to G to the S star divided by Vk to the C star for the first run, but also G to the S prime star divided by Vk to the C prime star for the second run. Okay, so now if I rewrite it in terms of exponents in G, so this is G to the S star minus X times C star. So we want to find X equal to the G to the S prime star minus X times C prime star. Okay, so we have this equality in the exponents. S star minus X C star equal S prime star minus X C prime star, which you can rewrite. So you factor everything out in terms of X. So you have X times C prime star minus C star equal S prime star minus S star, which gives that X is equal to S prime star minus S star divided by C prime star minus C star. Okay, so the ability of the adversary to find two forgeries for the same R star allows you to recover the discrete log of X. Okay, so these are the two main ideas in Schnorr's security proof. So if DLP is hard, Schnorr's signature is secure. Okay, so now I want to adapt this to lattices. Okay, so Lubachevsky's signature. So it's based on the following analogy, which at a very high level works, but when you look at the details, you often stumble into difficulties. But that's a high level intuition. G to the X and the discrete log setting is similar in some vague sense to X times A in the SIS setting. Okay. So in particular, G to the X times G to the X prime. This is a G to the X plus X prime. It's similar to an XTA plus an X prime TA. Because this is an X plus X prime times A. Okay. So you also have the following. G to the X to the C. This is similar to a C times XTA. Okay, so when you have some kind of discrete log protocol, you can try to adapt it to CIS using this type of analogies. So Lubachevsky's signature is in this sense an adaptation of Schnorr's to SIS. So let's see what we have. So keygen. Okay, so the keygen algorithm, I do X times some matrix A. This is of that form. I like to do rectangles because it's a good way not to make stupid type mistakes. Okay, so let's call this Y. Mod Q. Okay, so for a reason that we will see this afternoon in the exercise session, I don't take a single vector X. I take L of them. Okay, L of them. So this is of dimension M. This is of dimension N. This is N. And this is L. Okay, so I have, you could say that you have L itai hashes. Okay. So the secret key is this, the signing key. So that's the X of Schnorr. And the verification key, it's the Y, X times A. Okay, so now to sign using X and for a message M and 0, 1 star. Okay, so you sample Y. Ah, the Y is not good. I'm sorry. So this is VK. Because Y is now. So Y. Okay, so something important here in keygen. Okay, so I'll get back to this in a second. So you sample Y. So this plays a role of K. Okay, and now you compute what plays the role of R, which I called, how did I call it? W. Okay. So Y is the mask, is the future mask of X. So it's really like this. And W is the equivalent of VK. Schnorr signature, it's G to the K. Okay, so I compute C as the hash of VK, W, and M, like in Schnorr, but I have to specify what is the output of C. So C is going to be, so in Schnorr, C is multiplied by X. Okay, so here I want to multiply C with X in this way. So I want to multiply XA on the left by a matrix C. So to multiply on the left by a matrix C, it's convenient to take an L times L matrix. Okay, so in Z to the L times L. Okay, and now you output Z equal Y plus Cx and C. Okay, so how do you verify this? So you have VK, and you have ZC, and some M. So what you want to first recover is W. No, yeah, the W that is inputted to the hash function. So this W is YA, and YA you can recover because YA is ZA minus CXA. Okay, so you compute W prime equal ZA minus C VK. Okay, so it works out because ZA, this is YA plus CXA. So you have the YA that you are interested in, plus CXA, and CVK is exactly CXA. Okay, and you check if the hash of VK W prime and M is indeed C. Okay, so that would be a direct adaptation of Schnorr to the SIS setting. So, and now comes the technical difficulties to actually make it work. So if you do it like this, it's insecure. So that's one exercise of this afternoon's tutorial, because it's not even related to CIS so far. There is no smallness in what I described. Okay, so CIS is about finding short vectors in the orthogonal of A. So everything that is on the left of A should be small. Okay? So small means here that the entries in X are going to be below some Vx. The entries in Y, they are going to be below some By, which is a parameter. The entries in C are going to be below some Bc. Okay, and in the verification algorithm, I should check that Z is small. Otherwise, the attacker, I mean, this is the specification for the signature, but if I don't check it in the verification, the attacker has no need to play the real game of the signature algorithm. So it could just sample a big Z. So you check that H of Vk, W prime, and M is equal to C, and the infinity norm of Z, so the max entry, is less than some Bz. Okay, where with Bc, By, Bx, and Bz, carefully designed, carefully chosen for SIS security. Okay, so at least now I have some small guys. And there is a hope that I can adapt Schnorr signature to this setting. So I could just do exactly as before and pretend I reply to queries. So first I pretend I give a sys instance to the challenger. It uses this to generate the verification key. And then when I give signature queries, the challenger reprograms the random oracle to be able to give back to the attacker signatures that look honest. And then at some stage, the attacker manages to find a forgery for a new message, and then this forgery for a message should be extracted into a solution to SIS, using the same kind of homomorphisms that we used for Schnorr's proof. So this is wishful thinking. Unfortunately, this signature is still incorrect. Okay? And there is a difficulty here. So in simulation, you would have, as before, to generate a transcript ZC. So you sample Z random with, say, the infinity norm of Z smaller than some Bz. You sample C random with the infinity norm of Bc smaller than some Bc, of C, sorry. Okay, and you program the hash. So you would say hash of Vk and whatever works. So where is it? ZA minus CVK and M, you program it to be equal to C. Okay, so that would be the adaptation of the previous simulation to this SIS setting. And here there is a difficulty now, because previously Z was uniform mod P, and here Y was uniform mod P. So uniform plus whatever, it's still uniform, so that the left-hand sides of the pairs, the z's, were both uniform mod p. Okay, so. Okay. But here there is a difficulty in that here z is uniform with coordinates smaller than bz, but this z is not uniform with coordinates smaller than bz. Z is uniform in some interval, so it has a distribution of y, and then this distribution of y is shifted by c times x. Okay, so the center of this distribution, where the only randomness is y, the center of this distribution is cy, is cx. Okay, so it's not 0, whereas here the center is 0. Okay, so the distribution of the simulation, the z in the simulation, doesn't match with the distribution of the z in the real scheme. Okay. Okay, so the security proof cannot go through because the distributions of the simulated signatures doesn't match with the simulation with the distribution of the real signatures. So, in fact, the scheme that I just gave is also insecure. So the fact that this z has center cx is also a problem for security. So it's a good news. It's somewhat good news that we cannot make a security proof with this scheme. So to fix it, what you can do is to make sure that in the real scheme, the distribution of z is a proper distribution. That means the center 0. Okay, so how do you make sure of this? So you use rejection sampling inside. Use rejection sampling. Okay, so here it's kind of a big word because what we do here for uniform distributions in interval is a very simple version of rejection sampling. Okay, so what do? We say, okay, so we compute z equal y plus sc plus cx, sorry. And if there is an entry in y in z with magnitude, with absolute value, above bz, we reject. We restart sign from the start. So let's look at what happens in dimension 1. So for L equal 1. Okay, so you have Cx and y plus Cx. Okay, so you have, so the distribution is over the integers. Okay, and y is zero-centered with interval, with bound by. But now it's shifted by c times x, which turns out to be just an integer if l equal to 1. L equal to 1 and m equal to 1. Okay, so you have cx, and then the distribution of z is somewhere here. Okay, so your transcript z has distribution uniform in this interval. Okay, so what you would like is uniform in a zero-centered interval. Okay, so maybe 0 is here, say. So what I say is that, okay, so now if it's in the interval minus bz plus bz, you keep it. Okay, so keep z equal y plus cx if and only if z belongs to minus bz plus bz. Okay, and if bz is, so if minus bz is above cx minus by and plus bz is below cx plus by, so the whole interval of z is contained in the whole interval of y plus cx, then the resulting distribution is uniform. Okay, so if you sample uniformly in this, and you keep it only if it belongs to the small interval, then it will be uniform in the small interval. Okay. So when we set, so what are these? BC, BY, BX, and BZ. We should make sure that indeed the whole, so in dimension n and l, and with the general L and M, it's not just a line, it's a whole hypercube. The whole, not hypercube, hyperparallelipiped, hypercube. The whole hypercube obtained by y plus cx contains, so the whole hypercube for z is contained in the whole hypercube for y plus cx. Ensure that bz minus bz plus bz to the L times M is contained in okay, cx plus minus by plus by to the L times M. Okay, for every C and X. Okay, so that gives you a condition between the four bonds. So in particular, it's useful to set C very small because C is multiplied by X. So you want to set C super small, BC super small, bx somewhat small also because cx, that's the shift of the distribution for y. So you want this shift to be quite small compared to y. So you want bc very small, bx very small compared to by. Okay, and bz should be a little bit less because you want bz and bz to be always smaller than by plus cx, even when c and x point to the wrong direction. Okay, so it's important. So this is important for security. And then there is also an efficiency aspect in the rejection probability. If you reject too often, it means that you will have to repeat the signature algorithm many times. So you don't want to set bz to be too small. Because if bz is too small, you will reject most of the time, and your signing algorithm will be very slow. So you want bz to not be too small. Okay, so typically you would set bz as large as you can so that this condition is satisfied. Okay, so so far, simulation would be okay. So I have a way to simulate signatures by sampling a uniform z below bz, c as I like, and programming the hash function so that the algorithm passes, so that the signature passes verification. Okay, so I have a way to provide correct transcripts to the adversary without knowing the secret key. Okay, so the only question that remains, compared to what we did for Schnorr, is to exploit the adversary's ability to forge to break SIS. Okay, so we use the same type of forking methodology. So what we end up with in this case is, okay, so we have a pair, forking, we get a pair, we get Z star, C star, and so two pairs, two signatures, Z star prime, C star prime, such that the hash of VK Z star A minus C star VK and M star is equal to the hash of VK Z star prime A minus C star prime VK and M star. No, sorry. So this is equal to C star. This is equal to C prime star. And the second components of the hashes are the same. Okay, and it's this second bit that we are going to use. Minus times divided by vk to the c star. So g to the x to the c star equal g to the z star prime divided by g to the x to the c prime star, which led to x equal something like z prime star minus z star divided by c prime star minus c star mod p. Okay. So here we cannot do the same because this division mod p is not allowed in our case. So first we don't have mod p. Everything in front of the a's is small. Plus, if we introduce a mod p and divide, it's not going to be small anymore. Okay, so we cannot use the same, exactly the same trick. Okay, but what we can observe is that we have z star minus z star prime a plus c prime star minus c star vk equals 0. And in fact, just this is good enough, because this you can do as z star minus z star prime, c prime star minus c star, times a concatenated with vk. Okay, where this is small and non-zero. Okay, so you don't have a short element in the kernel of A, but a short element in the kernel of A concatenated with vk. And that's good enough because you can pretend that this was, you can say that this was A concatenated with vk was the sys input given to the challenger. Okay. Okay, so you have, so if I rewind a little bit, the challenger, before doing anything, receives a sys instance. Okay, so this is the sys instance. It's going to keep the top rows to be the A matrix and the bottom rows to be the verification key. Okay, so it slices the received sys instance into 2 bits, 1 bit which serves the purpose of A and 1 bit that serves the purpose of the verification key. And then it gives the correct bit as verification key to the adversary, and we run everything. Any question on this? I think this will be all for today.